Baseball's bright young stars Wilson Ramos has been kidnapped from his home in Venezuela. Ramos, a 24-year-old catcher, finished his rookie season with the Washington Nationals. Gunmen burst into his home west of Caracas last night.
A 16-year-old from Valencia signs a non-drafted free agent deal with the Minnesota Twins for a low five-figure bonus. 7 years later, he's an all-rookie catcher for the Washington Nationals. Then, on a November night at his mother's house, 4 armed men take him at gunpoint. This video is about what baseball did with 4 prior warnings, and what it took for a superstar's name to finally move the institution. In the United States, amateur players enter professional baseball through a highly structured, heavily regulated draft. There are slot values, clear rules, and the massive backing of a powerful players' union. But for international prospects, especially in Venezuela during the early 2000s, the rules of engagement were entirely different. They signed as non-drafted free agents, operating in a market that felt more like the Wild West than professional sports. Young teenagers, sometimes as young as 15 or 16, had zero collective bargaining power and no legal representation. They had to rely on local trainers, known as buscones, who operated as unregulated brokers. These trainers would scout children in local neighborhoods, taking a massive cut of whatever signing bonus they could negotiate. Major league teams held all the leverage, and scouts combed through Carabobo State, searching for raw physical talent that they could secure on the cheap. For Wilson Ramos, his ticket out of Valencia arrived on July 7, 2004. He signed a contract with the Minnesota Twins, securing a signing bonus that sat in the low 5 figures. For a working-class family in Carabobo, that check felt like winning the lottery. But for a multi-billion-dollar Major League franchise, it was an incredibly cheap, low-risk bet on raw human potential. Wilson took that bet and began the grueling climb through the minor leagues. But as he worked his way up, his path was blocked by a massive, immovable obstacle. In Minnesota, the catcher position belonged to Joe Mauer, the reigning face of the franchise, a hometown hero, an American League MVP, and a future Hall of Famer. Mauer had just signed a massive long-term contract extension that ensured no other catcher would see regular playing time in Minneapolis for a decade. Wilson was a premier prospect, but his path was entirely blocked. He spent years grinding through the Twins' minor league system. The Dominican Summer League, Rookie Ball, High 4-Day Myers, AA New Britain, sharpening his skill level by level, waiting for an opportunity that seemed like it would never come. By spring 2010, he'd finally climbed to AAA Rochester, one last stop before the door opened. That opportunity finally arrived on May 2nd, 2010. With Mauer sidelined by an injury, the Twins called up the 20-year-old rookie for his major league debut. What he did next was legendary. Facing the Cleveland Indians, Wilson put on an absolute clinic, racking up 4 hits. He became the first Twins rookie to record a 4-hit debut since the iconic Kirby Puckett did it in 1984. Even more historic, he became the only catcher in modern baseball history, dating all the way back to the year 1900, to collect 4 hits in his major league debut. But the business of professional baseball is completely unsentimental. Just 3 months later, on July 29, 2010, the Twins traded Wilson and pitching prospect Joe Testa to the Washington Nationals in exchange for closer Matt Capps and $500,000. Minnesota was in a heated division race and needed immediate bullpen help. They willingly traded away their future behind the plate for a late-inning rental arm. In Washington, Wilson flourished. The 2011 season became his official breakout year. He hit .267, crushed 15 home runs, and drove in 52 runs, finishing 4th in the National League Rookie of the Year voting. Nationals fans fell in love with him, nicknaming him the Buffalo for his sheer physical presence and toughness behind the plate. He was earning an MLB salary of $415,000. But back home in Valencia, that rising fame meant something entirely different. His modest family was now highly visible, completely exposed, and unmistakably connected to American Major League millions. Every home run he hit and every headline broadcast on Venezuelan television was quietly pointing a massive target on his back. He was returning home for the offseason, completely unaware that his success had made him the ultimate prize for local syndicates. Because by the time Ramos flew home for winter ball in November 2011, 3 other Major League families had already been kidnapped in Venezuela. Baseball knew this was happening before it happened to him. It was a warm November evening in Santa Ynez, Valencia. Wilson had recently returned home to play a brief 10-game Winter League stretch for the Tigres de Aragua. At 6:45 p.m. on November 9th, 2011, he was standing outside his mother's house, enjoying a quiet moment chatting with his father and 2 brothers. There were no bodyguards or private security details. Santa Ynez was a modest working-class neighborhood where families lived close together and everyone knew their neighbors. Wilson felt safe here. This was his home. But by choosing to stand outside in the open air without any security, he became a vulnerable target for crime syndicates searching for a massive payday. Suddenly, the quiet neighborhood street shattered. An orange Chevrolet Captiva SUV came speeding down the road and screeched to a halt directly in front of the house. 3 armed men jumped out with tactical speed. They didn't hesitate. They lunged at the catcher, pointing their handguns directly at his chest and screaming at his family to stay back. In a flash of absolute panic, the gunman grabbed Wilson, shoved his massive 6'1" frame into the back of the SUV, and pulled a black t-shirt over his face. His father and brothers could only watch, completely paralyzed with fear as the vehicle roared away, its tires squealing as it headed toward the mountains near Montalban. While his family and the baseball world were thrown into immediate chaos, Wilson's captivity was defined by a terrifying silence. The kidnappers drove him deep into the mountainous jungle, eventually arriving at a small, isolated cabin that had been prepared beforehand. This was a highly organized, carefully planned operation orchestrated by professional criminals who had used an informant to study Wilson's movements and daily schedule. When the blindfold was finally removed, Wilson found himself in a cramped, barren room. The public outside immediately assumed he was being subjected to brutal physical torture. But the actual reality of his captivity was a psychological mind game. The abductors didn't lay a finger on him physically. They gave him water. They even offered him traditional arepas with sardines to eat. But the psychological terror they inflicted was overwhelming. The kidnappers openly mocked his status, laughing at his pain and telling him they were going to extort a massive sum of cash from his team. They threatened to hunt down his family if he didn't cooperate. The abductors knew intimate details about his personal life, pointing to a well-coordinated informant network operating within Carabobo. Wilson spent those hours in constant fear for his life, unable to eat or sleep, as his captors kept him under armed guard. Every creak of the cabin floor felt like the prefix to a death sentence. Despite their boasts, his family never actually received a formal ransom demand, and nothing was ever paid. The lightning-fast intervention of law enforcement cut the kidnappers' plans short before they could even establish a line of communication. Yet, the psychological damage was done. As Wilson later explained, while they didn't harm me physically, the psychological harm I underwent was incredibly severe. He was trapped in the dark, listening to the whispers of his captors, completely unaware of the massive storm that was gathering just outside the cabin walls. While Wilson was trapped inside that remote mountain cabin, his kidnapping triggered a massive domestic and international firestorm. In Washington, D.C., devastated Nationals fans refused to stay quiet. They gathered outside the cold iron gates of Nationals Park, holding candlelight vigils and carrying signs that read, "Free Number 3." Back in Venezuela, the Winter League was plunged into shocked mourning. Games began with a somber minute of silence, and players from across the league wore green ribbons on their shoulders and embroidered green W symbols on their jerseys as a visible prayer for his safe return. In Carabobo, the elite anti-kidnapping units of the Venezuelan police, the CICPC, launched an intense search. Within 24 hours, they located the getaway vehicle abandoned in the town of Bayuma. Finding the SUV allowed investigators to narrow down the search grid to a specific region in the mountains of Montalban. The political stakes could not have been higher. President Hugo Chavez, facing a highly contested re-election in 2012 and rising criticism over violent crime, personally intervened. Chavez authorized an air-supported rescue operation, sending elite commandos into the rugged terrain. On the night of November 11th, the commandos closed in on the remote cabin. Inside, Wilson suddenly heard the deafening roar of automatic gunfire echoing through the trees. A fierce gunfight erupted between the tactical police unit and the armed guards. Wilson scrambled to find cover, diving under a metal bed as bullets pierced the cabin walls. He hid there, heart pounding, for 15 agonizing minutes until the gunfire subsided and he heard the commandos calling out his name. He crawled out, physically unharmed, after 51 hours in captivity. While initial wire reports listed 5 arrests, prosecutors eventually convicted 8 individuals. This organized network included a Colombian national with paramilitary ties, and even an elderly local couple, including Aristides Sanchez, who were charged as accomplices for cooking food for the kidnappers in the mountains. The dramatic rescue of Wilson Ramos was celebrated as a triumph of state power. But beneath the celebratory press conferences laid a dark, uncomfortable truth. The writing had been on the wall for years. His abduction was the inevitable result of baseball's refusal to address a systemic pattern of targeted violence against Major League families. The horror started in September 2004, when Mora Villarreal, the mother of pitcher Huguet Urbina, was dragged from her home. Held in a jungle camp rigged with explosive, she endured 5 grueling months before police rescued her from a $6 million ransom plot. Then came 2008. The brother of catcher Henry Blanco was abducted in broad daylight. Tragically, those negotiations collapsed and his brother didn't survive the ordeal. In June 2009, Colorado Rockies catcher Yorvi Torrealba's 11-year-old son and brother-in-law were abducted, with captors demanding a $460,000 ransom before releasing them a day later. Months after that, Victor Zambrano's mother was snatched and held for 3 days, just over a week after Zambrano's cousin had been kidnapped and killed. Every prior kidnapping had targeted a relative, yet baseball ignored these warnings. It was only a matter of time before criminals targeted a player themselves. Ramos got a vigil, a presidential order, and a commando unit. The kids still coming up through Venezuela's academics get none of that. And what happened to the academics themselves is where this story turns. At its peak, Venezuela was a goldmine of baseball talent. More than 20 Major League Baseball teams operated physical academies there, sending prospects to play in the rookie-level Venezuelan Summer League. It was an ideal setup, allowing teenagers to train in their home country close to their families. But after the Ramos kidnapping, Major League teams began a quiet, systemic retreat. By the mid-2010s, only 4 or 5 complexes remained, and in 2016, the Venezuelan Summer League officially suspended operations and shut down forever. Teams stopped sending American coaches and staff altogether, citing rising safety risks. The pipeline didn't close, it just moved somewhere safer. Teams routed prospects offshore, building massive complexes in the Dominican Republic and holding showcases in Aruba. Instead of letting prospects train at home where they were comfortable, Major League teams forced these teenagers to move to a foreign country. The safety of multi-billion-dollar organizations was secured, but the human cost shifted entirely to 16-year-old boys who had to grow up overnight. The system became safer for franchises, but left families in Valencia completely exposed. For Wilson, the psychological trauma lingered. He struggled with loud noises and suffered from recurring nightmares of the kidnappers coming back. Yet just 11 days after his rescue, he stepped onto the field and made his Winter League debut for the Aragua Tigers. He got a tattoo of the date 11/11/11 and a verse from Philippians on his left arm to remind himself he was born again. His family still lives in Valencia today. Wilson had the money to hire private security, but the 16-year-old kid signing a non-drafted free agent deal today has none of that. This is the ultimate hidden cost of the Venezuelan baseball pipeline. Think about that teenager. He doesn't get $1 million bonus. He signs for a few $1,000s, a low 5-figure bet by a major league franchise. If a criminal syndicate targets him or his family, there will be no public vigil at Nationals Park. There will be no personal presidential order from Caracas, and no elite commando unit that will be deployed into the mountains to save them. The system became safer for the multi-billion-dollar institutions the exact moment it became too dangerous and expensive to staff their academies, but it didn't get one bit safer for the actual human beings standing outside their mothers' houses in Valencia. They are the ones who continue to pay the real price for making the majors. Wilson Ramos played 12 seasons in the big leagues, made 2 All-Star teams, and retired in 2025 with a ceremony contract back in Washington. The system that produced him spent the years in between deciding it was simply cheaper to leave. But the talent pipeline never stopped. It just became a shadow of its former self, leaving the next generation of Venezuelan players to bear the heavy weight of their dreams completely alone. If you want to support this channel and make sure you don't miss our upcoming deep dives into the hidden, untold stories of the sports world, hit that subscribe button right now. And thank you for watching.